Whakatakatāhau ki te uru, whakatakatāhau ki te tonga, kia mā kinekinek uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiki ana te atakura te tio he huka he kauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Tau tohi tō uratau is the te reo Māori term used in Te Mātaihoko for responsive teaching, which is in many ways a better description for formative assessment or assessment for learning. Tau tohi tō refers to being skilled or adept, and uratau means to adapt. So it literally translates to adept adapting, noticing, recognising and responding to the needs of our ākonga minute by minute. The strategy we're going to focus on in today's webinar is called 2 Stars and a Wish, which some of you may be familiar with already, but we're first of all going to go through the theory behind our focus for today. As with all of these introductory webinars, we'll first discuss the key why and theory behind the area of focus, which today is providing feedback that moves learning forwards. This will be followed by unpacking one simple strategy, 2 Stars and a Wish, that can be used to support this area of tau tohi tō uratau responsive practice, including the enablers and barriers for and to success. We'll finish with some examples in a range of curriculum areas. Providing feedback that moves learning forward is an essential aspect of learning that has been well researched and documented all over the world. John Hattie's meta-analysis highlights feedback as one of the most powerful instruments for improving student outcomes, as can be seen here. Dylan William identifies it as one of the 5 main aspects of good formative assessment to show students the next learning steps in their journey. Without learning intentions being clear, shared and checked for understanding, effective feedback cannot be provided. And without students acting upon the feedback or owning the learning, it is not as impactful as it could be in any way. The concept of feedback runs through all 3 of our Te Hiku o Te Ika Kāhui core achievement challenges and is a large part of our iwi aspirations. So there's plenty of rationale to spend time as kaiako upskilling, understanding, applying and improving our own feedback practices. Feedback that moves learning forward includes the idea that feedback must cause thinking, not an emotional response. Feedback should be focused on clear, shared and understood learning intentions and success criteria, and will ideally result in more work for the recipient than the donor. However, effective instruction has to happen first. Clarity of the what, why and how of learning, with lots of exemplars and models, good and not so good. Some I do, we do, you do, and regular checks for understanding. This feedback for learning matrix was created from research conducted by Helen Timperley and John Hattie, both from Aotearoa. It clearly outlines the purpose to reduce the gap between where students are in an area of learning and where we aim for them to be, along with how this gap can be narrowed, some of them which is not ideal, particularly number 2 under the student of abandoning, blurring or lowering the goals. The key way we can reduce this learning and knowledge gap is through appropriate goals, big and small, and effective engaging learning strategies and feedback. The questions circled in the centre are the cornerstone of assessment for learning. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? The bottom section refers to the 4 levels at which feedback can be provided, which we'll look at in more detail on slide number 8. We often use the term feedback to also mean feed up and feed forward. Dylan William often talks about how if we only ever give feedback at the end of learning, it's a bit like a post-mortem after someone's passed, when it's not much use to that person, compared to a regular medical checkup to identify issues that can be rectified and responded to on a regular basis. Therefore, it's vital that we provide our tamariki with feed up to let them know where we're headed in the longer term and lesson to lesson. Feedback to reflect on what has been achieved, which informs the most important aspect, which is where to next, step by step. You know you're on the right feedback track when you can ask all of your students these 3 questions and elicit a comprehensive response. Research in classrooms all over the globe has shown that the majority of feedback provided is at the self or personal level. For example, good girl, well done, look how clever you are, check out the brains on Brad. This is often habit, which we all know are the hardest things to break, and I'm guilty of this myself, and unfortunately reinforce fixed mindsets about learning and link with a low sense of efficacy for many of our tamariki. Task performance is the next most commonly administered level of feedback. It's really important, but it's not the only one. This refers to feeding back, stating if mahi is correct or incorrect, and providing really explicit, specific instructions for improvement. Process is the next level, which refers to task completion and problem solving, and the level at which we're supporting the most growth with feedback is at the regulation or metacognitive level. This helps build ākonga capacity to be disciplined, focused, and to interpret information to provide their own feedback. Part of regulation feedback is to build motivation and commitment to the task and confidence in their self-efficacy. If you'd like to dive deeper into the 3 optimal levels of feedback related to the 3 feedback questions, there's a really useful table with examples that's in the link on this slide. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a clearer picture that I could copy onto the slides, but if you click on the link, you can see this explained really clearly. A final note to the theory of feedback before we move on to our strategy that applies this theory. Students can grow their feedback literacy, which is shown in the diagram here, and we need to support them to do that. There's always a result of feedback provided, which we hope is positive action towards reducing the gap, as discussed earlier. The result can, however, also be inaction and various other unintended results in between. In order for ākonga to receive and respond to feedback optimally, we need to teach our tamariki how to appreciate feedback, recognising it as a valuable source for their learning and that they need to be active in responding to it. Making appropriate judgments about what the feedback's telling them is also a vital skill that must be taught. A realistic evaluation of the quality of one's own work and that of others is necessary in order to use feedback processes effectively, and this can happen at any age from 5 to 500. Lower performing learners in particular are often unable to assess their performance because they often mistake effort for quality. Being provided numerous opportunities for self-assessment allows learners to improve their judgment skills and ultimately to learn to autonomously plan, monitor, and adjust their work process based on this assessment of quality. Feedback can elicit effective responses that relate to our ākonga feelings, emotions, and belief, particularly when it's slightly critical. The strategy we're going over today reduces this effective response by providing 2 positive feedbacks and 1 next step, suitably managing any effective results from the feedback to ultimately improve learning. If we tend to these 3 areas, then learners are more likely to take positive action towards their learning goal. This whakatauki comes from a lovely resource I found in the Te Reo Māori classroom called a whakatauki cube, which is used to help support growth mindsets in our tamariki, and I felt it was relevant to our kaupapa of feedback to move learning forward for today's webinar. Mā te kimi ka kite, mā te kite ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka marama. Seek and discover, discover and know and become enlightened. So the focus for today's webinar strategy is 2 stars and a wish. So we're going to go through the success criteria for 2 stars and a wish. And the reason that we're focusing on this is it supports all aspects of feedback literacy, especially the affective, and it can be used for all levels of feedback and all 3 questions. So clarity of learning, as you will see through all of these strategies, is at the top of pretty much all of their success criteria. Excuse me. If we haven't made, shared and checked for understanding of clear intended learning, then there's nothing concrete to give feedback on. A clear success criteria is needed to ensure feedback provided is relevant to the intended learning and isn't directed at a fixed ability of the student. Apologies, I just had to go and have a coughing fit. For example, if in reading and writing, you're teaching students to identify or make clear the purpose of a text, then giving feedback on spelling and punctuation is going to be both confusing and detrimental to learning. State the goal for the students and stick to it. Clear is kind. Also, the feedback should involve more mahi for the receiver than the provider, as previously mentioned. So ensure that the action is clear and taken and followed up. As with introducing any new strategy, set yourself and students up for success by considering their cognitive load. When teaching the strategy, ensure you model it with familiar context that students are aware of the success criteria for already, as in the examples on the next slide. A great way to get students familiar with the strategy is also to use anonymous exemplars for them to provide feedback on so that the affective dimension is removed. Ideally, they would have this modelled first by you, then perhaps consider doing one as a whole class, and then in pairs, which also has the added benefit of making the learning really clear as they're seeing it through multiple exemplars before they give themselves or receive feedback on their own mahi. If you're a uniform school, then this is an easy and engaging topic to use to explain the process of feedback using 2 stars and a wish. You could begin by casting the dress code on your screen, or maybe co-constructing the success criteria with students who should know it even if they don't quite follow it. Once you have the uniform success criteria visible, you could model 2 stars and a wish for the student who you know will be fine with this, who has one thing incorrect with their uniform. There are 3 examples here at 3 different levels of feedback. They all follow quite a similar script. Danny, 2 stars for wearing the correct white shirt and black shoes. My wish is that you wear black bottoms tomorrow. Dave, 2 stars for arriving on time and getting your equipment out to start. My wish is that you get straight on with the do now on the board rather than chatting until I direct you to your mahi. Sarah, 2 stars, as I've noticed when you finish tasks early, you help others with their mahi and often reread your work. My wish is that you use the rubric you were given last week to see how you could improve your work to a higher standard. The 3 examples provided are at the 3 different levels of feedback. Other easy examples could be any embedded routines you have during the day at school, such as lining up for assembly, sustained silent reading, or packing up for lunch. The 2 examples here at the task and process level for some mahi integrating writing and dance and a technology example. Notice that in the examples provided, the feedback, which comes from a specific set of success criteria, is generic and not tied to the context of learning, which also is an important aspect of assessment for learning in the area of clarity. What have each of you noticed and or recognised, and how will you respond to this strategy? For many of you, it may not be new, but there are always ways we can improve how we do things. That's the nature and responsibility of our role as Kāhui. For some, it might be recognition that most, if not all of your feedback is at the self or task level. For others, it may have highlighted that you don't have a clear success criteria from which students can give or receive feedback, or that you are not explicitly sharing the success criteria with ākonga throughout the learning process. For others, it could be that you're providing a lot of feed forward, but not feeding back on what has been done well to ensure that it's conscious and not accidental. If you're watching this as a recording, it would be useful to pause the video now to share your 2 stars and a wish for this strategy for your own practice. Set a goal and share it, as these are 2 mechanisms that are more likely to lead to improvement in your teaching and ultimately enhanced outcomes for our Te Hiku o Te Ika a Maui tamariki and ākonga. As always, please get in touch if you have any partai about this or would like to have some extra support as a school around how to best use this and the other resources or anything assessment for learning related. Anuhia, anuhia, anuhia ki te uru topi nui, kia wātea, kia māma te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, ki te ara tangata. Kōia rā e rongo, whakaeri haia ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina, hui e, Tā kia.